Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Prime Minister Netanyahu's corruption trial kicking it into high gear this morning with the first day of evidentiary proceedings. Meanwhile, President Rivlin starting his meetings with party officials to work towards finding a prime ministerial candidate. And finally, a supposed coup subverted in Jordan. Stay tuned for the details. "16 months have passed since Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit first issued indictments against Israel's sitting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And today, initial evidence and witness testimony taking center stage. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arriving to court Monday morning in Jerusalem for the first day of evidentiary proceedings in his landmark corruption trial. And the heavy police protection detail ferrying him to the courthouse directly into the underground car park, avoiding large crowds of protesters both in opposition and in support of Netanyahu. The premier, for his part, long denying the charges of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery levied against him in cases 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000, as a witch hunt aiming to subvert democracy and oust him.
אזרחי ישראל, מה שעומד היום למשפט זה הניסיון לסכל את רצון העם. הניסיון להפיל אותי ואת מחנה הימין. וגם כאן, אתם יודעים איך זה יסתיים. לא יהיה כלום, כי אין כלום, ולא היה כלום. אני מתכוון להמשיך לשרת אתכם ואת המדינה כראש הממשלה עוד שנים רבות. אל תאמינו לכל הספינים.
Chief Prosecutor Liat Ben-Ari's opening statements, however, arguing that the indictments are based on concrete and circumstantial evidence, including recordings of conversations and text messages that would all prove the charges against Netanyahu. Netanyahu, meanwhile, already leaving after Ben-Ari's opening statements, his request to skip the remainder of the day's proceedings approved by the court, as President Rivlin beginning his meetings with various parties in hopes of finding the best candidate for prime minister in the next government. The court making clear, though, that Netanyahu's absences today and going forwards cannot be used as a basis for any objections. So what will Netanyahu be missing? Well, cases 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 respectively deal with suspicions of accepting illicit gifts, attempting to reach a quid pro quo agreement with Yediot Achronot publisher Arnon Moses, in which favorable news coverage would be exchanged for favorable legislation that hurt rival news publisher Israel Hayom. And finally, in case 4,000, Netanyahu accused of conspiring with communications mogul Shaul Elovitch, where Elovich's Walla News company would provide positive news for Netanyahu in exchange for legislation favorable to the Bezeq telecom company, which Elovitch owned at the time. And Ilan Yeshua, former chief editor of the Walla News outlet, at the center of case 4,000. And he's first to take the stand, giving testimony today, which Netanyahu will miss. Retired legal experts, meanwhile, predicting that the case will drag on for at least 3 years. Now, aside from Netanyahu's criminal trial, across town, Israeli President Rivlin holding his first discussions with various party officials following the fourth inconclusive Knesset election in less than 2 years' time. President Rivlin urging lawmakers to be flexible or risk heading to a fifth vote, saying that at the moment he can't see a way to form a coalition. But already some lines are being drawn in the sand. Likud, for one, choosing Netanyahu outright and with no alternative, arguing that the country knows about Netanyahu's legal situation and supported his leadership anyway. The Religious Zionism Party similarly backing Netanyahu and a right-wing government, calling on Yamina's Bennett and New Hope's Gideon Sa'ar to join them and eliminate the need to sit with any Arab party like Ram. Then Blue and White Chair Benny Gantz throwing his weight behind Yair Lapid of the Yesh Atid Party, as is Labor and Meretz and the Yesh Atid Party itself. Though while New Hope has yet to unveil its top pick, both Yesh Atid and New Hope expressed willingness to sit with everyone, including the Likud, as long as Netanyahu isn't a part of it. Lapid is also said to still be working towards a rotation agreement with Yamina's Naftali Bennett, reportedly offering Bennett the first go at being prime minister during a supposed breakthrough discussion Saturday night. And it's for this reason that the Arab Joint List has already backed away from supporting Lapid, calling Bennett an ultranationalist extremist and opting instead to not vote for anyone. Finally, as for pragmatic but Islamist Ram and the ultra-Orthodox parties, it's unclear how exactly they'll vote. But the Haredi Shas and UTJ will likely back Netanyahu at first, while expressing willingness to sit in other groupings. Still, no clear path to a winner, with no clear majority voting either way. So what will happen at the end of President Rivlin's consultations on Tuesday evening? Joining me to discuss is legal counsel for the Halel Likud Forum and Im Tirtzu, Ziv Maor, and Israeli journalist and attorney Ben-Dror Yemini on Zoom with us. Now, Ziv, I'm going to start with you, though. You've been confident in the past that the right-wing bloc will have it. Are you still confident?
I'm confident that this is no longer the case. Right now, my bet is on fifth election. I've been here in the elections night, and we've seen and we analyzed together the results of the exit polls. According to the results that the exit polls have given us, Ram was outside. Well, Ram was not elected with its 5 representatives among the left-wing bloc. And where these were the results, this was a sure win for the right-wing bloc. Right now, when Ram is in, this is no longer the case. I am not seeing any way out of it apart from fifth elections, but I might be surprised after all.
All right, Ben-Dror, let's turn to you. I know that you have been reluctant to give me any sort of predictions. Are you still reluctant to give me predictions now that we're so close to either fifth elections or possibly a prime ministerial candidate?
Well, first, I don't know. I just do know that the left-center bloc should really thank Netanyahu, because as long as Netanyahu is not retiring, there will not be a right-wing government. So the only option to have a right-wing government, as Netanyahu called it, male male, full, I mean, only right-wing parties, it will be if Netanyahu himself will retire. In a minute, there will be a right-wing government. But it's not going to happen. And I do think that Lapid and others should thank Netanyahu for his staying in office. Now, what is going to happen? We don't know. I mean, for sure that we don't have to be so much impressed from the declarations that we hear from all sides. I mean, Smotrich and others. I mean, one of them is going not to keep his promise. Otherwise, yes, we will go to fifth election. And I do hope it will not happen. I guess most of us hope that it will not happen. We can see it in public polls and so on. So let's hope that something will happen in the next week, in the coming week. But we have no idea. Last night, there were many rumors that something is cooked between Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Eventually, it's not clear what really happens there. I guess we will know today or tomorrow or the other day if something is really going on.
All right, now, as we've heard earlier, we heard both from Gideon Sa'ar and the New Hope Party and Yesh Atid's Yair Lapid Party, or Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid Party. They've both
it's the same.
They've both expressed interest or willingness, rather, to sit with the right and even with the Likud, as long as Netanyahu is not there. Now, an interesting solution has popped up. Some of the Likud sources are saying that Netanyahu may instead drop out of the legislation and run for president to replace President Rivlin in the coming months when his term ends. Ziv, I'll start with you. Do you think he's likely to win, and do you think that is likely to happen? Do you think that would be a good solution?
I think nothing should be defined likely. Now, let's explain to the viewers that Israel is a parliamentarian democracy, and the position of the president is not similar in any way to the position of the president in places like the United States or France. The position that the president in Israel has got no authority, is a representative figure. He is supposed to be an individual which all the parties, all the parts of the society look up to and acknowledge. This is not the case with the past 3 presidents at least, but this is what it is supposed to be. Netanyahu going to the presidency is Netanyahu giving up on his position. Now, Ben-Dror just said that the left should thank Netanyahu because at the moment he steps away, then then there will be a right-wing coalition. The issue is, and the reason for which people like Gideon Sa'ar are so insisting, even though he himself is a rightist, he's a conservative, he believes in those values, insisting that Netanyahu will go away, is the fact that there is a huge gap between the capabilities of Gideon Sa'ar, Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, and other potential candidates for Prime Minister, and Netanyahu themselves. As long as he's in the race, they have got no chance whatsoever. Regardless of what's going to be, if we are going to have a 5th and 6th cycle, this will still be the same. Because we do not have to choose between Bennett and Sa'ar and Lapid. We have to choose between Netanyahu and some other guy who has not proven to be so worthy. So as long as these are the cards that we handle, this is going to be to go over and over again.
All right, Ben Dror, I want to turn to you. Let's talk a little bit about the Arab parties, because pretty much everybody's talking about them and how they're going to vote and whether or not that'll give us a coalition or another election. 48% of Israelis polled said that they'd be absolutely fine with a coalition based on an Arab party. Are they being naive?
No, they're not naive. There is a huge change. I mean, when we compare it even to 1 year ago only, when most of the Israelis disqualified them. Right now, most of the Israelis, for them, it's really bearable. And again, it's very interesting because we all have to thank those who think that Arabs should be part of the coalition. We have to thank Benjamin Netanyahu, because it's actually mainly because of him, because of his kind of contacts with Ram and in particular with Mansour Abbas. So actually, he paved the way to this kind of coalition. We cannot forget that Yair Lapid said just not long time ago, 3 years ago, that any coalition with the joint Arab party is impossible, and he called them the zombies. I guess we remember what he said. And now, yes, it is possible. It is accepted by most of the parties, except, of course, Bezalel Smotrich. So it is possible, and if Netanyahu will not resign, and he is not going to resign, yes, we cannot form a government without them.
All right, Ben Dror, Yamini, thank you so much for your time. Ziv Mo, thank you so much for coming in. Now, talk about a crisis. Neighboring Jordan narrowly avoiding a supposed coup over the weekend. The Hashemite kingdom arresting nearly 20 people, including King Abdullah's half-brother and former Crown Prince Hamza bin Hussein, calling the alleged plan a threat to the country's stability. Chana Rivkin with the story.
I'm making this recording today to try to explain what's happened over the last few hours with me.
In a video passed on to the BBC over the weekend through his lawyer, former Jordanian Crown Prince and half-brother to the king, Prince Hamza bin Hussein, explaining that he's been placed under house arrest for being involved in discussions critical of the government and of sowing instability in the kingdom. As part of the arrest, Hamza's security detail has been removed. Communications to his home were cut, including phone lines and internet. And Hamza was ordered not to speak with anyone outside of family, including on social media. And all this despite the military confirming that Hamza himself had not made any problematic statements. Rather, it was simply his being present during such discussions that's causing problems for the state. Since being stripped of his official title and removed from the path to the throne in 2004, Hamza has been building ties with tribal leaders who run an anti-government protest movement called the Hirak. And the Hirak in recent weeks has resumed calls for protests.
الأردن مستهدف دائما، يعني الأردن على مدى تاريخه مستهدف، وهناك أيدي خارجية طبعا تلعب دور في زعزعة الاستقرار، لكن هذا بلد دولة عميقة، الأردن دولة عميقة، دولة ثابتة راسخة بقيادة جلالة الملك، ولا يمكن أن يستطيع أحد أن يزعزع الاستقرار في هذا الوطن.
Allegations going on to say that Hamza and the others who were arrested plan to spark civil unrest in the country in the form of popular uprising, backed by tribal groups and maybe even a yet unnamed foreign actor.
ولا أحد فوق القانون، لا أحد حسب الدستور الأردني، لا أحد فوق القانون، وهناك سيادة للقانون في المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية. ما جرى أمس جرى التعامل معه. أي شخص يسعى إلى زعزعة الأمن والاستقرار في هذا الوطن سيتصدى له الدولة الأردنية بكل قوة.
But His Highness did not refrain from communications or continued criticisms as ordered. Hamza repeatedly taking to social media through various channels since his arrest to expose the conflict from his perspective. Denying involvement in any conspiracy or nefarious organization, Hamza saying that the country's 10 million people have become increasingly stymied in corruption, nepotism, and misrule, while not being allowed to criticize. His arrest in itself serving as proof. Meanwhile, an outpouring of support both for the government's actions and for Prince Hamza coming in, including from Israel, where Hamza's personal friend Roy Shapshanik offered to temporarily house Hamza's wife and children. But most just relaying confidence in the systems at play, largely ignoring accusations of corruption levied against the prince.
إجمالاً أنا مطمن لأنه إحنا هاي زي ما أنت شايف ما في أي مظاهر عسكرية بالبلد، وهي أنا طالع من الصبح وأنا مش رايح على الشغل، أنا تسوق نازل، ما يعني أنا مرتاح من اللي قاعد بيصير، متأكد إنه الموضوع راح ينحل سريع.
So how will the alleged coup in Jordan play out, and what effect will this have in the region? Joining us with more is fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, Reserves Major Dan Pfefferman. Dan, thanks you so much for being with us again.
Pleasure.
All right, so first of all, there are conflicting reviews of Prince Hamza's actions. What do you make of them? You know, was the Hashemite kingdom right to silence and quash his potential protest groups?
It's two different questions, right? If they're right to do it or not, I think that's an internal issue, and everyone's politics can get involved in that. I think it's a bit too much to call it a coup. There's been growing protest in the kingdom, in our neighbor here to the east for quite some time. The economy is quite shaky, and it's only been made worse by COVID, which has cut off tourism, a huge lifeblood to their economy. Add to that there are millions of refugees from Iraq and Syria living in the country. So the country didn't have a strong economy to begin with, and there's been claims of mismanagement, of corruption. There's a hospital recently that ran out of oxygen, and people who were on life support due to COVID died, perhaps unnecessarily. So all of these kind of protests are coming together, and Prince Hamza, who's the former crown prince, seems to be connected to them. It seems to be more of an effort by King Abdullah and by the regime to shore up support, to silence or quiet dissenters, maybe within the family, more than anything, similar to what MBS in Saudi Arabia did a few years ago when he sent a number of his critics to the Hilton for an extended stay. And that seems to be similar to what happened here.
Well, so that actually kind of brings me to my next question, because the Jordan deputy prime minister, he said that they had been investigating Hamza for some time. Is this, but again, he was stripped of his power, of his title in 2004. So is this just another move to consolidate power, or does he really have an argument? Or maybe does he have his own, Hamza, does he have his own, I should say, a mission to maybe replace his half-brother?
I think his mission might be to get popular support around himself, which he seems to be quite popular in the Jordanian public, and he's striking on a lot of chords. It's hard to say if he's really behind some of these protests. It's hard to say how much he's really trying to coalesce some kind of movement. It was claimed that he has international support. It doesn't really seem to be the case. It seems to be that he's taking advantage of the situation to try to get back maybe some of the power he lost back in 2004 and perhaps become the crown prince again, maybe challenge his half-brother for power to some extent, while striking a chord with some of the real criticisms over the governance of the kingdom.
So again, would you consider his meeting with these tribal leaders, these protest leaders, would you consider that to really be in forwarding a coup or a popular uprising as the government is accusing him, or is his argument more legitimate than that?
It seems to be somewhere in the middle. It seems to be that he was either the criticism and the people who were criticizing were coalescing around him. Maybe he had some kind of hand in pushing it a little forward. And I think the king and the government perhaps took advantage of this to try to quiet some of its critics at this sensitive time.
So my final question, where does Israel fall into this? Because obviously any sort of big upheaval in Jordan is going to affect us.
Sure. And I'll point out that the deputy prime minister mentioned that they're investigating foreign interference. They didn't mention who, but social media in Jordan, around the Middle East, and some journalists who are supposedly connected to the kingdom, to Amman, have mentioned some kind of Israeli interference. It seems to be they're talking about Israeli individuals and not interference by the Israeli government, Israeli individuals who are close to former Crown Prince Hamza. Any kind of destabilization in Jordan would be disastrous for us. They've often been described as a strategic buffer, a strategic asset for us. Absolutely, we have had and continue to have strategic cooperation on defense affairs, on intelligence sharing. It's the longest border we have in our country, and the fact that they've managed to keep it stable and quiet means that we don't have to focus our troop deployment or our intelligence assets on that country. They do a fantastic job for their own sake, as well as for ours, of keeping ISIS or other kind of Islamist threats in check. And I think it's in our supreme interest, as well as the supreme interest of the United States and of other now friends in the region, to make sure that regime in Amman stays stable and thriving through these difficult times.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Major Dan Pfefferman. And those of you at home, if you'd like to hear more about this coup, make sure to check out ILTV's Insider today, featuring Major Pfefferman and Professor Mordechai Kedal. Thank you again. Now, finally, we're getting away from the pandemic. Ben Gurion International Airport even reopening its train station finally. But let's not forget that the pandemic has cost us. In addition to the priceless lives lost, the Israeli Treasury estimating that the virus will leave us with a 180 billion shekel deficit, approximately $54 billion and about 12.6% of the annual GDP. So what'll happen? What can we do? With me to discuss is consumer behavior and international marketing expert, Assistant Professor Vili Abraham. Vili, thanks so much for being with us again. Put this into layman's terms. How bad is the situation?
Well, we're talking about the highest budget deficit in the history of the country. In fact, it's the highest in the world, only to be surpassed by the budget deficit of the United States, which is about $3.3 trillion, Canada, and the UK. So it really doesn't look good. Really huge budget deficit. It means that the government will have to find ways to fill the government coffers, which are really empty right now.
So, first of all, do they have a plan to fill these coffers, and how will the average Israeli feel this deficit?
Well, there are no media reports about any government plans at the moment, but we can assess what can happen. When there's a budget deficit, there are really two things you can do. On the one hand, you can increase taxes, but if you increase taxes too much, this will have a counterproductive result, which will be decrease in consumption. What you want to do is you want to increase consumption. So you have to balance between, on the one hand, raising taxes, and on the other hand, decrease spending. So it means that the average Israeli will probably feel this by paying more at the supermarket. So VAT is 70%, it could be higher. We might find ourselves paying more for gas, paying more for import products, maybe paying even more income tax, paying more fees for different government services that we're getting. And because of the expected budget cuts across the board, it might even impact in a very negative way the level of service that we're getting from government ministries, because they'll probably, have fewer working hours or fewer people providing services. So we're all going to feel this one way or another. Hopefully, tax hikes will not be as significant, and I really hope it will not be on food. I think one of the major problems is that there's no differential VAT. There's a 17% VAT on everything you buy. Yeah. And if there is an increase in VAT, I hope it will not be on food, because if you look at statistics, the gap between the rich and poor in Israel has only increased with the pandemic. And if food prices will increase more, this will only increase the gap between the rich and poor. And this is something we want to avoid.
All right, well, I absolutely agree with you there. Professor, thank you so much for being with us.
It was a pleasure.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Hi, Aaron. Clear skies for Monday and Tuesday, with temperature lows this evening in the 50s or 60s, or between 12 to 20 degrees Celsius, depending where you are in the country. Then tomorrow, our heat wave rising even more in temperatures, with highs in the 90s or 30s in Celsius.
And now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Only in Tel Aviv, everybody has a dog, even the birds. That poor dog, he doesn't know he really should not anger that bird. I think it's a crow, and it will always remember his face. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.32 shekels to the American dollar and 2.64 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv as well, and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Aaron Porras. Stay healthy. Thank you so much for watching.